Welcome to the Play Podcast with me, Douglas Schatz. Hello, and welcome to episode 98 of the Play Podcast, where we explore the greatest new and classic plays. I'm Douglas Schatz, founder and host of the Play Podcast. The curtain rises on a recording studio in Sausalito, California in 1976. Two engineers are completing sound checks, while two musicians chat as they wait for the other three members of their band to arrive. The unnamed band has just started recording their sophomore LP here, when they learn that their first album has unexpectedly climbed back up the charts. Their newfound fame comes with added pressures, though, from the record company's inflated budget and the glare of artistic expectations. The creative stress takes its toll, as does the tedium of living together out of a suitcase and the long hours holed up in the studio. A strain appeased, or perhaps exacerbated, by a daily diet of cocaine and alcohol. No wonder there are fractures in the band's personal and professional relationships. This is the extraordinary play Stereophonic, which tells the story of a fictional rock band's growing pains as they spend a whole year in a studio working on their second album. The play is a riveting, fly-on-the-wall depiction of both the magic and the monotony of collaborative artistic endeavour, as the cast recreate in real time the process of making music and play out the price they pay for their art and fame. Stereophonic premiered at Playwrights Horizons in New York City in October 2023 before moving to Broadway in April 2024, where it was nominated for 13 Tony Awards, more than any other play in Broadway history, and won 5, including Best Play. The play was written by David Adjmi, directed by Daniel Aukin, and includes original songs written by Will Butler, formerly of rock band Arcade Fire. As we record this episode, the show is on stage at the Duke of York's Theatre in London's West End, with 4 new British actors joining 3 of the original cast, all of whom give astounding performances that include singing and playing the instruments as a live band. I'm thrilled to be joined today all the way from Los Angeles by the play's author, David Adjmi, who has enjoyed a whirlwind ride with the success of Stereophonic over the past 18 months, although it is not true to say that this was an overnight success, as I believe that Stereophonic was 10 years in the making, more of which I'm looking forward to hearing about. David was already an award-winning playwright whose previous plays include Stunning, Marie Antoinette, 3C, Elective Affinities, and The Evil Doers. He's also the author of Lot 6, his critically acclaimed memoir. Welcome to the Play Podcast, David. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So I mentioned that Stereophonic was 10 years in the making, and some of that time may be explained by the fact that this is not a conventional play, nor is it a musical. One could try to label it as a hybrid of the two, I suppose, but somehow that doesn't even seem right. It's its own thing. And I think you've actually said none of this should have worked. So how or even why did you come up with this mad idea?
Well, it's a good question, and it's something I keep asking myself because it's been such a long time in the incubation of it that I can't fully remember. I think I had to block a lot out. I didn't do it because it was such a bizarre experiment, and it was just kind of, I think a lot of my plays are just these weird intuitions that crystallize for me over time. And this was one of those. I knew that the idea for a play set in a music studio and using that setting as kind of an apparatus to tell a theatrical story about a band making a record, that would be interesting to me. But I didn't understand how I could make it dramatic because of the nature of that space and what people do in that space. And so that was one of the challenges of it. I also knew that I really wanted to upend the tropes around these rock band stories or rock star stories. And I wanted to show the moments that people might want to excise from those stories, the kind of ordinary diurnal things that happen when you are in the midst of a process. And I know about that because I'm in process a lot of the time as a playwright. And so there's an analog there. But it was really just like a long form experiment. And I let myself luxuriate and take the time that it needed in order for it to find itself.
I'm interested to know what tropes you wanted to upend, because you're right. We think of these rock stars as stars, but actually what we see in the play is ordinary people a lot of the time. But also I read somewhere that the kernel of the idea came to you when you were traveling on a plane and you heard a Led Zeppelin song. Is that right?
Yes, the play is not about Led Zeppelin, but I was on a plane and I was listening to in-flight radio and I heard this Led Zeppelin song, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. And the thing about that song is, well, there's a couple of things. It's overdetermined because that song was something my brother used to play on his guitar to teach himself guitar. And he was much older than I was. So as a little boy, I knew the chords of that song and they were lodged in my unconscious. And I had never heard the song. I just knew the chords. And so there was something about that that was quite uncanny for me, hearing the song for the first time. So that's the first part of it. And then there's something about the nature of the song and the vocals and how raw and incendiary and contradictory they are in terms of like crashing with the lyrical content, because the song is about, I'm going to leave you, I'm going to leave you. But actually, Robert Plant is singing about lust and desire for connection, actually. And this kind of like, I can't leave you. I can't leave you, and please don't ever leave me. And there was something about that contradiction and that polarity in that song that really mesmerized me. And then when I heard it, I imagined him in the studio because I was going, how did he sing this, something this raw in a studio for a recording process? Like that feels so formalized, but this is so breaking form. And I tried to imagine what he was going through emotionally in the performance of it. And I imagined him in a studio and I imagined the setting. And that's what made me go, this could be a play.
10 minutes before logging on here, I listened to the Led Zeppelin song. You're right. It's unbelievable cry of anguish, really raw. But the other thing that struck me, his voice is so big and the band is so big, that sound. And as you just said, imagining them doing that live in the small space of a studio, it must have been just overwhelming to be in there, to hear that, or to be part of that. But it strikes me, as having listened to that even more, that the idea of capturing that on stage seems crazy. So I want to go back to asking you about this challenge. So you have this idea of setting the play in the studio and playing music, I assume, right? And so that required real band to play real music. Did you from the start think, okay, we're going to write original music and these actors are going to play it?
I did. I knew I was going to have to find a composer. I knew I wanted them to sing bits and pieces of songs. I knew the form. I understood the form of it, because what happens in this play is they start playing music and you're like, oh, great. They're going to play this great song. And it is, I think, but then they have to stop 20 seconds in because something went wrong technically. And then they have to start again. And then they have to start again. Now that tedium is verisimilitude. That is how these processes happen and transpire. So there was something also about counterpositioning that against this kind of raw, electric, crazy, anguished vocal stuff that really interested me. That juxtaposition was interesting.
It's interesting. It also stands in for art of any kind, that stop and go creative process, whatever the medium. I'm interested then how you went about developing the songs themselves and how they're connected to the play you're writing, because the songs are written by someone else, right? They're written by Will, but they feel very integrated. They're actually coming out of the characters who are playing them, and they're saying something about their position at that time in their life, about their emotions. They come from them. How did you bring that off?
It wasn't easy. It's a little bit like I talk about it like doing a crossword puzzle, because you have to know six down to get 14 across, but you also need to know 14 across to get six down. And so the chicken egg, I mean, really what had to happen was I began with a structure and I knew how I wanted to instrumentalize the music, to use the music for dramatic purposes, not just because we wanted to hear a great song, but that these songs and the fragments of music that we hear would be positioned in the play very strategically in order to help tell story. But I sort of decided I would have these little micro plots for each of the songs. I would position the songs scene by scene, act by act. I knew I wanted the songs to recur in different iterations and in different arrangements over the course of the play, that it wasn't just about adding new songs in and hearing new songs, but that we would be part of the process as audience members. We would be involved with how these songs get made. So that was all put in an envelope of a draft that I worked for a really long time, and I didn't know anything about music or how music was made. So I had to figure that out. Like, what is this process that I'm trying to adumbrate and show people? I don't know. So I had to learn about that. Once I sort of had that all kind of loosely set, I put things like, okay, this is where they argue about the bass riff in this song that doesn't exist yet. Okay, great. Now, Act 4, oh, now they're really arguing about it, and so on and so forth. Then finally, I really conscripted Will to come in and look at what I made. Like, here's the shell of it, Will. Here are some dummy lyrics I threw in. You can use them or not. Here are these arguments about these songs that don't exist. You have to fill that in. Here are the characters. Here's the world of it. Let's read it. You can internalize what I made and then go off and do your thing and see if you can like start to fill in the crossword puzzle. And so that's what we did. And then we workshopped it and talked about it a lot. Like, is this the tonality that we want here? Is this the feeling tone of this song that's going to work in this scene? You know, irrespective of how good it is, does it work dramatically in this scene, in this context, based on where we are in the play? What is it doing to us here emotionally? And is that right? So these were the conversations that we were having over the course of, I would say, maybe 18 months, as Will refined it. And he'd bring in another song, and we'd pull things out. And we talked about it. And it was a very wonderfully collaborative process.
It's amazing how multi-layered that is, the way the songs actually work, because as you say, we see these false starts, and we've talked about the evolution of making art like this, but also that they come from somewhere that makes sense emotionally for the characters. So what's going on when they're doing this back and forth of the rehearsals is interesting as much for the music as it is for what the characters are bringing to it and how they're reacting to each other and what it signifies for them at that moment. And then there's the lyrics as well of these songs, which have something to say because they're written by the characters in the play who are performing them and come from their emotional wellspring, so to speak. So it works on all those levels. And also the music is just fabulous in itself. It's mesmerizing to watch them develop it and perform it. And when they get it right, it's hugely exhilarating, as it must be for them, as it is for anyone who does this or creates art when it's right. And there's a moment, is it near the end of Act 2, when they do Masquerade and they've done like 30-something takes, and then they nail it. And they're just euphoric, quite rightly. And so are we, because we've just had this one-off magical moment of when it all comes together. And it's like we're at a sort of private gig of some kind, but we have witnessed something really special.
Yeah. If the play works on you, you are invested in the process of them making this thing.
Yeah.
And so if that's happening, then when they get it right, you're exhilarated with them. And that's what I want.
Yeah, well, that definitely has that. So now, David, for those who may not get a chance to see the show here in London, I wonder if we could give them an introduction to these characters, a bit more detail, and the briefest synopsis of the plot of the play, such as it is. Now, I've got to issue a spoiler warning here, of course. If you're still going to go to the show, you may want to turn off now and come back later to listen to us. But we're just going to plow on, and we may give away some spoilers. So you've had the warning. So, David, could you start us off by telling us who's in this band and what happens to them over the course of this play?
Okay, I'm going to do my best. Ready? So it's an Anglo-American band in the 1970s. There are 3 British members, Holly, Reg, and Simon. And there are 2 American members, Diana and Peter. Diana and Peter in a relationship. Holly and Reg are in an on and off relationship over the course of the play. And Simon is married, but his wife is not there. So Diana is one of the lead singers. She doesn't really play an instrument, although you could argue the tambourine is an instrument. And Sarah Pigeon, who played it in New York, said it was really hard to do the tambourine. So I also think Diana, she's quite underconfident and she undersells herself. And so she says she doesn't really play instruments, but she can play the piano. She does end up playing it over the course of the play. But I think that she is somebody who She's a real artist, but like a lot of real artists, doesn't always know where it comes from or if it's real or how to keep doing it and why do people like what she's doing. She's egoless about that stuff. Her partner, Peter, is not as egoless. He is. He has an ego. I think he is quite a disruptive force in the band, but he's also, I think about that movie, that Werner Herzog film where they're taking the ship up the hill, Fitzcarraldo. I think Peter is a guy that's like, get that ship up the hill. I mean, he's going to make it happen. He's quite determined. He's very focused. He adores music and he adores greatness. And he really does not want to compromise. And he has no bedside manner whatsoever and no tact. He's just like, he's all business all the time. And he just wants to make this record amazing. And so I think, he's a bit of a splinter in this band because he wants them to make a great record and he's helping them to make a great record. But I think he doesn't always know how to massage things and he drives them all kind of crazy. And, Daniel Dawkins, my director, says Peter's love language is helping everyone get better. That's how he loves them. But that also alienates them in the end. And then Holly and Reg are in their relationship. Reg has a lot of problems that I don't go into in his past. I know what they are, but we don't really know about them. But he has real substance abuse problems and anger management problems. But he's actually quite a poetic, artistic, pure soul in a lot of ways. I just think he's seen a lot of dark things in his life. And over the course of the play, he is struggling with how to love his life and how to live in the world with all of its difficulties and sometimes ugliness and still love it and still love the work that he makes and love other people and allow himself to be loved. And so, he's in this relationship with Holly over the course of the play. You don't know for sure what's going on. I mean, that was one of the things I really wanted to do a show, because this has happened in theatrical processes where someone's maybe together, but then 2 days later, they're on opposite sides of the rehearsal room and they're not speaking. But then 3 days later, they're holding hands. And so, and everyone's kind of like, what is going on between these people? And so I kind of wanted to emulate that.
You're right. We're never really sure what's going on between Holly and Reg.
I don't think they're ever sure either. I think they're really confused. I think they really love each other. I think everybody kind of all loves each other in this band, even though they all hate each other. Which that is the Led Zeppelin thing. I'm going to leave you. I'm going to leave you. It's like, well, are you though? But Holly has a very difficult time with this man who she's married to and then eventually leaves over the course of the play. But she really does love him and she wants to be seen by him. She's quite an enigmatic character. I had a very hard time writing her because she would resist being written. I think she's quite a private person in a lot of ways. And she's really tricky character to write because she's so reserved. And sometimes she's really fun and adorable and warm and wonderful. And then she just kind of freezes up and gets really gelid and cold. And so she's so hard to read. I think Holly and Diana are just like, it's hard on them as women in this band, and especially women whose currency is, yes, you're professionals. Yes, you are artists. Yes, you bring your know-how to the musical part of this, but you're also our girlfriends. And I think I wanted to really look at that tension and how they navigated it and how they try to keep this kind of professional, private thing when everything's public. I mean, there's a line in the play where Reg says, one of his meltdowns, Holly says, let's talk about this in private. And he screams, it's private in front of them. And everyone's in the room.
Yeah.
Kind of like there is no private when you're in a recording studio, 16 hours a day.
Yeah, that's one of the things, isn't it? 16 hours a day, and they're living together in a rented house. It's way too much.
It's way incestuous in way too many ways. And then Simon's the drummer of the band, and he has become the manager of the band. Recently, they have fired the manager for reasons I don't get into. And he's trying to be the grown-up in the room. And he's trying to keep this thing going. And when everybody's having their meltdowns and kind of going bonkers, he's going, wait a minute. But he does have his own meltdowns over the course of the play, particularly when it comes to his drum sound, which becomes kind of the focus of a whole act. And the play is really about these people just making this record over the course of a year. It's their second album together. They start out thinking it's going to be like a 2 or 3 week process, which is, I guess, normal for them or for most bands at that time. And then they learn that their previous album starts charting again. And it starts going up and up the charts thanks to a song by Diana. And once that happens, the label triples their budget. And it turns out that they have the highest budget ever for an album. So the pressure is really on. And then that starts to widen the fault lines between them. They all kind of freak out, although they don't really talk about it, but you can see it in their actions. And it just goes on and on and on. And, their perfectionism starts to take over and their anxieties about being this big rock band take over. And they end up staying there for over the course of a year.
Yeah, and the relationships are deeply frayed and fractured as a result. I wanted to just ask you about the title, actually. What did you have in mind when you called the play Stereophonic?
Well, I had the title on that plane ride when I heard the Led Zeppelin song. I it was going to be called. So my titles sometimes come to me out of nowhere, and then I learn later why I'm calling it that. And with this one, I really think that this play is about duality. There's a lot of doubling going on in the play. I mean, right down to the set, which is there are two playing spaces because you have the control room where the engineers are. Oh, I didn't even talk about the engineers because there's two engineers. They're in the control room in the front. So we are sort of watching the play through their eyes a lot of the time. And then the band, when they're recording, is in the sound room, which is in a glassed in soundproof booth. And sometimes there are scenes happening with dialogue overlaps between those two spaces. Often there's dialogue overlaps inside of each of the spaces. So that is one of the bifurcations inside of the play. But I think what this play is looking at is duality. I mean, really at the end of the play, and this is a spoiler, but Grover, the engineer, says to Diana, "Don't you think this was kind of a nightmare?" And she laughs about it. And then she thinks about it and says, "No, this was the best thing that ever happened to me." I mean, it was a nightmare. It's both at the same time. And I think that for me is the play. It's not that you have to suffer to make great art. It's not about the transaction, but it's holding both in your mind at the same time. And that is something I had to struggle to learn as an artist as I was writing the play. So I think the play became kind of like a love letter to art, but also like a little coded message to myself, a little message in a bottle to me to love the thing that was also driving me crazy because it is really, really hard to do this art form and to keep at it for as long as I have.
I love that, the duality of the artist, the work and the inspiration, the blood and the sweat and the tears, but also the creativity. And there's dualities, you say, all over the place. I mean, there's the couples in the play, of course, and their relationships. There's the voices that they contribute in the music as well, the multiple voices. And you talked about the spaces. There's the public and the private you alluded to as well. So yeah, it's a great title. The more I started thinking about it, the more resonances I saw. So great choice. And the fact that it just came to you is amazing. Talk about the form of the play. We've got an idea that this is not conventional because it's got the music, as we've said, but also I thought it was interesting about the pacing and the rhythm and the sort of hyper real detail of the piece. And you talked about the overlapping dialogue. I mean, it takes its time. It's a year in the studio, and that's reflected, I think, in some way in the fact that it unwinds slowly. You're not afraid to let tedious things and everyday things happen. They take a long time over recording these tracks, but also what they're talking about. There are diversions and it can be pretty mundane. And I wondered at one stage, I mean, clearly this is deliberate, but there's a risk in reproducing the longueurs of this process in real time, so to speak.
Well, I had thousands and thousands of pages. I did like a lot of character studies. I knew I wanted it to be largely a character study and that I wanted people to like fall in love with, or at least fall in love with watching these kind of sometimes lunatic characters. And I also knew I wanted to explore this idea of intimacy, that you could feel an intimacy with people who are rock stars and people that we get to know them as they're blown out glamorous selves. But what's the obverse of that? What are they like when they're not blown out and glamorous? What are they like when they're feeling insecure? What are they like when they're so slap happy and exhausted that they're almost not making sense? And so how do I immerse people in this feeling so that we can get this kind of very raw intimacy with these characters? So I have never written a play like that before. I'd never tried to do it. It wasn't something that I knew how to do necessarily. It wasn't like a kind of go-to for me or a crutch or anything. It was something I was experimenting with, and the play is a big experiment. Part of what was going on with me when I wrote the play was, well, here's the setting. This is going to dictate. I knew I wasn't going to leave the studio ever, and that claustrophobia was going to dictate the form in some way, and that their process would dictate the form. So the recording process has these phases, and I had to learn about what those phases were. So that was part of it. It was like, okay, this is going back to the crossword puzzle idea. I knew 5 down. I knew they were going to be in the space. I knew the 6 down. I knew that they were going to record this album, that I was going to show them making songs in phases and changing things, and that we would return to these songs. And it wasn't about, I want to have 15 songs, so we have this great soundtrack, but it was like, maybe there's 4 songs and we just really get to know those 4 songs. So those things I knew. So that was going to dictate dramaturgically what I explored. And I also knew, well, they go on breaks, right? I've gone on breaks when I'm rehearsing a play, when I'm in the middle of the process. What happens to me on my breaks? So once I had that kind of substratum, then I started to go, okay, but what makes this dramatic? And how can I build the drama in a way that, yeah, it's a slow burn. I mean, there are people who think, oh, there's nothing happening in this play. And it's like, no. There's a lot happening in every scene, and it's crafted within an inch of its life. That I feel very confident about, because that's why it took me so long to make it. Because if you didn't have that, it just is a bunch of people fixing their instruments for 3 hours. So what is the tension? What's happening underneath? They're not always talking about it because they can't always talk about what's going on. But hopefully the tension is underneath.
That absolutely is. And it all comes out of these characters when they're, as you say, behaving like ordinary people, not like rock stars, because they amble in late, although they're hungover and they do drugs, so maybe like rock stars. But, they bicker and quarrel, and the dialogue's about their everyday existence. The coffee machine's broken, life in the shared house, what they're doing last night. That's the very ordinary thing about it. And it reminded me, I remember hearing Chris Martin of Coldplay. It was very shortly after Coldplay became huge. And he was talking about how, like, one weekend, he was on his way from his parents' house to his grandmother's for Sunday lunch. And, within weeks, he's in superstardom. Ordinary people find themselves propelled into this different world, but they're still ordinary people, of course.
That's one of the main dualities in this play. And having that kind of artistic persona and being famous, but also being this person who has no self-confidence and doesn't know how they're doing it. I mean, that is fascinating to me.
Yes. And to talk about craft, I absolutely understand how meticulously orchestrated this is. In fact, I was very conscious in the theater of the orchestration of so many entrances and exits, and the precise overlapping of the 2 stage spaces, and the dialogue that overlaps, as you talked about. And then actually, when I came to see the text, it's extraordinary, because all of that's documented in columns for the 2 different spaces. Yeah, it's definitely meticulously crafted. And in fact, Will Butler said it's authentic what you've created as well. The longueurs, when you're in the studio for an extended period of time, you sort of lose your mind, but you're also trying to create something great. But talking about these characters a little bit more, can we talk first about Peter and how complicated and obsessive, self-centered he is? I think there was some interesting clues in the play about his family background and how that tells us something about who he is and why he maybe is the way he is.
Yeah, it's a bit Freudian with Peter. We know a little bit about his family, but what we know is that his worth was premised on what he could achieve for his dad. And it's very, very obvious. It's sort of shockingly obvious to everyone else in the play. This man is somebody who needs to achieve, and he can become very petty and very jealous when he doesn't feel like he's doing the best work. Because I think that's how he was raised. That's where his value came in his family. And I think he's in denial about it. In the beginning of the play, has this conversation with Diana where she finally rips the Band-Aid off and is like, your dad has screwed things up for you in a major way. And he's like, what are you talking about? I had a great childhood. He was amazing. Look how successful I am. Look how great everyone's doing in my family, because that's the only metric he has. And I think by the end of the play, he starts to realize that this thing that is driving him to perfection and helping him to be a success and to make everything great, and it's working. And he is a real artist. He's not just, somebody who wants to be perfect. He is an artist with an artistic drive. But that thing is a demon and it has a dark aspect to it. And I think it's also destroying him and it's destroying his relationship. So I find Peter a very heartbreaking character. And I sort of, my dad didn't do that to me. My parents did the opposite. They were just like, good luck. And they sort of left me on my own to, I'm Generation X. So that's what I had to do. But I understand the need to fight to be seen via your achievements, to show people how good you are and say like, see, I did great work. Now, do you love me? You know what I mean? People don't often love you because of what you made. And if they do love you, it's just superficial and fleeting. That's not where real love comes from. So that's a lesson I think Peter is starting to learn over the course of the play.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way you drop some hints about the background. So there's this classic moment where we discover that Peter's brother is competing at the Summer Olympics in Montreal at the same time, and he's in the recording studio, and all of his family are up there watching and supporting his brother, and he's not. And he says, well, I'm here making a record, which for him is more important. And it's clear that there's some stress involved in the achievement level of his brother versus him. And Diana suggests the father has pitted them against each other in competitive ways. So that's kind of heartbreaking. I mean, this is all a bit Freudian, but you can see how that's put pressure on him and that he's carrying some trauma. And actually, there's mention that he hasn't spoken to his brother for a time, I think. So there are some issues that he's carrying with him from his family. But you're right that he is so committed to what he does. And even though he's overbearing at times and drives everyone crazy, as you said, actually, most of the time he gets it right. What he's doing is improving the result. So it's kind of complicated the way we feel about him. He's very unlikable a lot of the time. And yet we also grant with some respect that he is actually getting things right. But I wanted to ask you, one of the trickiest areas is his relationship with Diana, because his behavior towards her is not good a lot of the time. As you mentioned, she's lacking in confidence. They've been together quite a long time, since she was very young, I guess. And she has been looking to him as a kind of mentor, but it comes over as quite controlling and even coercive at times. He's very discouraging to her. How do you read the way he behaves to her?
I think it's very interesting. It's very much a Rorschach, this relationship that Peter has to Diana and what people see and how controlling he is and how coercive he is. I think he sometimes has bad temper and he can be blunt and sometimes a bit rude, especially when he's exhausted. But, I'm very careful about how I talk about him because I think a lot of it is what people are reading in between the lines. And this is 2025 now. It's a different time. I think if this were being done in 1976, who knows what people would be seeing about their relationship? It would be a different context. So I don't know. It's very interesting. Peter, he has an ego. He can be disruptive. He can be difficult, but he's not a full-on jerk, not at all. And when he argues with people, he will say over and over, okay, you're right. I hear you. Yep, got it. Like he can hear things. He's not being a total jerk. Now, sometimes he is being a jerk, and the moments he's being a jerk, they're not great. And that was in the writing. I wanted to push people, and I wanted to see how far I could take this character, but also have people understand him and care about him and see where he's coming from. And it's a tight wire act, really. So there's a scene where Diana's having a really hard time. She's overdubbing one of her songs and she can't hit the note in her own song. And they're there all night. And finally, he says, do you want to re-record it in a different key? Which means they'd have to read you the whole song. And she's like, no, I can do it. He's not helping her. But it's it's sort of codependent. What she's asking of him is sort of like he can't really help her hit the note. And so it's a little bit blurry about what's meant to really happen there. And he's not really being her boyfriend. He's a producer right there in the studio. So
I think you're right that it's a codependence there, isn't there? Because I wrote down at some point, is he entirely to blame? To be fair, she keeps asking for his help and then gets angry when he's telling her what to do. So no wonder he's confused. And he does really believe that he is helping her, I think. His manner in so doing, and there are moments when he does behave badly, for example, when she seems to be succeeding, he's grudging in his praise for her. He seems a little bit resentful or jealous even that she may eclipse him in some fashion, perhaps. But on the other hand, that moment where you talked about when she does nail it, after all this, they've argued and argued and argued, she has a real go at him. In fact, says, I don't think we should be together anymore. And what's interesting from Peter's point of view is he comes out of there and he's devastated, I guess, personally because of what she's saying to him. But then she nails the note and he then says, yeah, that was really good. As in, he understands how good she is and respects that. And I thought that was a really interesting balancing moment for him.
I think there are many, many points in this play where Peter could just be carted off to a mental institution seriously, and he just keeps going. So that is where he earns my respect. Like at the end of the play, I think he is on the verge of having a complete nervous breakdown. And 30 seconds later, he comes back on stage and starts fighting again for the album length and how to create continuity on the album. It's insane. It's almost like he's just been to battle and he's broken, and then he comes back ready for the next battle. So I have tremendous respect for Peter, but I understand why people are triggered by him.
Yeah, well, there are moments of tenderness and vulnerability. I mean, there's that moment where Simon and Reg are saying they're going to have dinner at the house, and he asks them kind of plaintively, do you mind if I join you? And clearly, this doesn't happen often. It's all gets slightly awkward. And he says he wants to be brotherly between them all, perhaps as a substitute for his lack of brotherly connection in his family. Put that Freudian aside again. But he's lonely. He's not very good at the social stuff with people, is he? So he ends up on his own. And he doesn't really want to be isolated like that, ironically. And yet, of course, in the next minute, he starts behaving like an asshole and starts insulting Reg and the whole bit. So you get it all within a very few minutes. But you can see that there's pain in there as well.
He wants a family desperately over and over and over the course of the play. I need family, but this is how he knows how to have family. That's family to him.
Oh, you're right about that because it reminded me, he and Diana have this conversation about the possibility of their having children, and he would want to have children with her. But this leads us, I think, to Diana now in her side of the story in terms of their relationship, because she starts off, as we've said, subjugated to some degree to him, but realizes that she needs to break out to become herself, independent in some way. Particularly as interesting as an understanding of their fame is growing. She actually gets some approbation and success with the songs she's written, and that gives her some more strength. And then she finally starts bristling at his control and his criticism and starts fighting back. And then this moment doing her own song and not being able to hit the note, and then having the argument and telling Peter at that very moment, I'm going to leave. And then she girds herself and then nails it. It's like she's shaken him off because she's determined herself as well.
Well, that whole scene is a metaphor for their relationship because she cannot leave that studio until she breaks up with him. She can't hit the note until she breaks up with him.
Yeah.
She releases herself to be able to sing her song. I mean, it's so silly, but like that's now she can sing her song.
Yeah, and she wins some sort of freedom that way. And in fact, the idea of their having children, and I think she realizes that would be the opposite of freedom. She would be stuck then, and that would limit her potential to be a full member of the band.
I think in the beginning of the play, she refuses to even bring in one of her songs because she's so nervous that people are going to hate her songwriting and they're going to critique her. She doesn't have a lot of self-confidence. So when she's challenging Peter and says, like, listen, I can't have babies. Like, I know that I have not a lot of self-confidence, but I have enough self-confidence and I'm garnering more and more of it to fight back against this idea that I'm just going to be a wife and mother. I can't do that. I have an artistic soul. And I think that that is the thing that she's trying to fight for over the course of the play. She never, one thing I say to everyone playing Diana is by the end of the play, she's not this fully empowered woman. She still worries that people think she's, being difficult. She still doesn't totally have a sense of her worth. She doesn't.
Don't you not think she's seduced by the prospect of fame and success?
I think fame is a bit of an albatross in some way for her. Fame dislocates her identity. Fame isn't something that she possesses. It's something that's being thrust upon her. So she doesn't understand why she has it. It's kind of, I compared it when we were in rehearsals, I was talking to the actresses playing Diana and saying, like, it's a little bit like a guy at a bar coming onto you. It's like, what is he coming onto? What is he seeing in me? He doesn't know me. You know what I mean? It's a projection. And so you're not in control of it. So I think the fame, and Diana talks about this, destabilizes her identity as much as it gives her a sense of power. It's both at the same time.
Yes, it is both. And she does say that someone told me that if you're famous, you can only be friends with other famous people, and I'm not doing that. However, she then talks about meeting Tony Orlando and being chatted up by him. And I think she's not disliking all of that.
Well, that scene where she's bragging about meeting Tony Orlando, she's doing that in a very strategic way in that moment, which I won't give away. But I think, yes, she's seduced by it. I also think she's starting to take a lot of drugs by the end of the play. But I don't think deep down that she's a girl that wants fame. She knows that that's not going to be the thing that nourishes her and that gives her a sense of worth. She really wants to be an artist. That's what I think. She wants to find herself in that.
Okay. Well, in fact, as we discovered, the record company offered her a solo album, which I think she would want to do because, again, she wants to identify herself independently that way. But who knows? I think it was really interesting. I think you touched on at the very beginning about the position of the women in this band, because I think there's a connection between Hawley and Diana where, in a way, they're bonded against the patriarchy of the music business or the world more generally, and that they have to navigate that every day with their feckless, difficult male partners as well. And I think it was really interesting the way Diana emerges represented a sort of change in what was primarily dominated by men as rock and roll stars. And you think of Fleetwood Mac and the women in that band, for example. Did you have that in mind as part of the objective?
I think it wasn't so much of an objective, but it was something that crystallized organically as I was working, because I always think about rules when I'm making a play. Like, what are the rules? What can they say? What can they not say? What can they do? What can they not do? And how do I shape protocols in this environment? And one of the things I thought about early on was these women really can't cry ever in this studio, that no one can see them cry because they will be undermined for their lack of professionalism. That was something. They can't really talk about their relationships except for when they're alone. And even when they're alone, I think it's grudging. It's kind of coded. It's uncomfortable. So I was starting to realize there's a lot of stuff that these women don't have the latitude to do that these guys do have the latitude to do. Like, the guys have a lot of meltdowns, but the women just have to kind of like hold it together and try to gird themselves and try to just numb themselves. And then there are a few scenes where they're together and no one's in the studio with them. And there's this kind of fabulous intimacy that you see, and they're totally different when they're just together. And those scenes are some of my favorite scenes in the play, because I just love how much they love being together. It's almost like sleepaway camp when they're together on stage. And it's so sweet and endearing.
They're really looking out for each other, aren't they?
There's a real love.
Yeah. It's interesting about what they don't say. And with Hawley, for example, you talked about how we're not certain about what's going on with Hawley and Reg and that back and forth. And actually, it just reminded me that through it, you don't hear a lot of explanation from her or any of them about why things are what they are or what's happened in the interim to make them the way they are, even between the women. Though there is a moment where Diane is slightly surprised because they're back together. They seem to be good again. Reg goes on this health kick and he is better, and Hawley might be able to put up with that. And then actually she tells Diana that she has an old-fashioned idea that marriage is for life. And she, in some ways, really wants to stick with this and does love him, as you said at the beginning, and is very unhappy when he goes off later with someone else, even though she's left him. And I wanted to ask you very specifically about this. We talk about the form again. There's this incredible diversion, which seems somewhat unnecessary initially, where Hawley goes on a lengthy riff about how wonderful Nick Rogue's film Don't Look Now is, especially the famous sex scene with Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland. And I sort of wondered, and I'm sure people in the audience might even wonder, David, what the point of this digression is. But I think there's this amazing payoff, if I've got this right, where she gets overtaken by sadness when she's thinking about these characters in the end, because the characters in the film have lost a daughter. And she says, maybe that's why the sex scene is so beautiful, because you know it's coming from grief. It's touching her because you realize that the grief for Ollie is losing Reg at this moment, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, when I wrote that scene, I just wrote it in one sitting. I did not know what was happening. She was just talking to me. Holly didn't always talk to me. When I was writing, I was waiting for her to say stuff, and she was just extremely private. So what happens in that scene is she's basically berating Reg when she finds out that he's found someone new, like really quickly. He's just like, oh, we're going to move in and we're going to have this great life. Yay. And she overhears it and was like, what? And you realize, yes, she broke up with him, but what she wants is not to be broken up with him. She wants to be seen by him. She wants to have someone who sees her and loves her and is willing to fight for her. And I think it makes her crazy that she's in love with this guy who is incapable of doing those things. And it's tearing her up. And she berates him in the scene, and he just goes, what are you talking about? And he leaves. And then she ends up kind of flirting in this weird way with this engineer, Grover, in this scene where she's describing the movie. And it's this weird, it's almost like she's trying to recover from this rupture in her relationship with her ex by trying to flirt and be happy and have this kind of conversation about this movie. And then she just ends up circling back around to her grief by the end of it without realizing how she got there. Because I think the grief is just waiting for her around the corner. And that is the sad thing, that she can't really escape it. And she desperately wants to escape it, and she wants to be happy.
She relates clearly to the depth of the relationship between the characters in Don't Look Now, as expressed in the sexual scene. I think is something that she understands, perhaps what she's had in some way with Reg, maybe. But you also said earlier that Holly is hard to read and that she seems more confident most of the time than Diana. But she is, in fact, as we're saying, vulnerable, obviously by Reg's absence. And then when Diana says she's going to make a solo album, maybe, she has this vision of Diana leaving the band and being on her own. And she says a line that just jumped out at me in the theater when she said it's torture to need people. And she clearly needs people emotionally more than you might have expected from her. And also it's interesting, of course, is in practical terms, she needs the band. She's not going to be the solo artist like Diana. It doesn't look like that's in her. So she definitely needs these people. And it's pretty difficult when they behave the way they are for her.
Yeah, she's not going to get what she needs in the end from these people whom she loves.
Really?
I don't think so. I think that's what her conflict is. But I think Holly is being a little jumping the gun with Diana. She's like, oh, you're going to leave the band. And there's a lot of argument. Does Diana leave the band? Some people think she does leave and she goes off to have her solo career. But I think Diana likes being in this band, even though she hates being in the band. But she sees the chemistry. They need each other. They do love it. But it is torture. It really is breaking them and making them simultaneously, and they're both equal forces. That's really hard to deal with.
Yeah. Let's touch briefly on Reg again. There's a temptation, I think, some of the time not to take Reg seriously because he's very funny, beautifully played by Zachary Hart here in London, that catches all of these phases he goes through, his addictions. You feel for the unhappiness he's going through and whatever is causing him to behave this way, to not be stable, because he's not particularly stable and is a problem for the band a lot of the time. But there's some part of him is very sweet, isn't there?
Yes, I think he's very childlike in a lot of ways. He's very pure-hearted and he's a lover of beauty. And I also think he wants really to heal. And he's humbled by his own desire to be a whole person and this desire to love the world, to see beauty in this world that is permeated sometimes with ugliness and a life that was permeated. He wants to love it. And I think sometimes he's like 8 steps ahead of himself. A lot of things that he does, it's like, some guy down on the street gives him a pamphlet. Hey, have you read Carlos Castaneda? Check this book out. And he's the kind of guy who will just, anyone who tells him anything, he gets interested in it. Oh, that's fascinating. My God, I've got to read this book. I've got to learn about health foods. I've got to know about this and that. So he's always trying to improve himself and be interested in life. And I find him very, very lovable. But yes, he is a straight white man in 1976, and he can be infuriating at the same time.
Yeah, he is lovable. And you're right. I can see him becoming a Buddhist or living in a commune at some point.
Yeah, I worry that he joins one of those cults like Synanon in LA because I think he's addicted now. He has that addict's thing of like, okay, I won't drink, but now I'm addicted to health foods. And then when I'm not health foods, I'll be addicted to my relationship. He has to focus all of his energies on something in a way that's somewhat unhealthy. And so he's not fully resolved his problems by the end of this play.
No. There are dangers in that. You're right. But it's also very attractive, his desire to find beauty and joy. And he has this wonderful conversation with Grover. Grover says, having spent his year in this studio with this mad band, that life is about suffering. And in fact, he says his father left when he was 3 and his mother had this motto, which was suffer and learn. And Reg says, it's a choice. You suffer if you choose to suffer, or you can choose joy. And he goes on, and the biggest sin of all is to believe that life itself is not good. Whether in failure or success, we must never take our eyes from the fact that it is an amazing world and we must rise to its challenges and we must love life. Okay, you can be skeptical because, as you say, he's reading Carlos Castaneda and he's had his first drink of the day, but actually it's pretty hard to resist him.
Well, I think, again, there's another duality at the core of the play. And the play doesn't resolve it. And he is not, some people misread that as a thesis for the play, that the play is like, no, but see, life is great. But I think Grover's point is as valid as Reg's, right? Because Grover says, listen, I've experienced moments of joy. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Basically, life is about suffering. And for many people, including me, when I wrote the play, this is a hard scene for me to watch because it's close to the bone. And when I was writing the play, I was in a very difficult place. So it was really me fighting with myself at the end of the play and sort of dramatizing an inner conflict about how do I feel about this world and how am I going to live and continue on? And so I kind of leave it really unresolved because he says, we have to love this life, Reg says to Grover at the end. We have to love it. We must. It's almost like a moral imperative. And Grover turns to him and says, but is that something you can actually do? And then he just looks at Grover and it's unresolved. And Grover is living with his own pain over the course of this play. He has been broken by Peter. He becomes the producer of the record with Peter at the end of the play, but it breaks him and it makes him hate music production. He's so mad. He's so cynical. He just wants to get a career going. Great. I'll win my Grammy. Good for me. I don't care about music anymore. All of my illusions are gone now about what this is. And then there's, of course, another twist at the end of the play, which I won't get into.
Yes, but you're right. He goes on a journey, doesn't he? Because he starts as a slightly naive and idealistic, and he's actually blagged his way into this job because he hasn't got the experience required, but he grows in confidence. Initially, he's very deferential, but he starts to intervene more artistically, telling the band, for example, the tempo's too slow on a song, or insisting that Simon uses a click track to maintain his speed. And he also hardens, I guess, as a result. So he does what he needs to do to get the job done. Managing Peter, for example, is very interesting because it's almost impossible, but he acts like a politician, as Grover says. He has a surprising line to Charlie when, in fact, he declares that he hates Peter. And actually, you believe him And yet he's managed to somehow subsume that enough to be able to get the job done, not to alienate Peter completely. So he's grown up in that sense and learned, suffered and learned. And I think that, yes, he's recognized that suffering, but that he will continue to do that in the future.
Yeah, I think he's gone from innocence to experience over the course of this play. But I think on some level, he's still untouched. He's hurt by Peter, but I also think he loves Peter. And I think he wants Peter to love him. It's like there's this weird unrequited love story between these two men who are very similar in some ways. I think Peter sees himself in Grover. Grover also comes from a broken family. Grover has also had a very damaging relationship with his dad, who has been absent. And so there's something going on there. He admires Peter deeply. I mean, he really reveres him at the beginning of the play, especially. He sees him as like a musical genius. And I think he's just hurt that he's not being seen and loved by Peter, no matter how hard he works. But then at the end, and I don't want to say the final reveal, but it's like you look back at everything that happened between Peter and Grover after you learn this piece of information at the end, and it's like, wait a minute, what was really going on here? What was Peter really doing for Grover over the course of the play? It's quite ambiguous.
Yeah, and I think you get some idea at some point that Peter comes to respect Grover.
He makes Grover the producer. I mean, Peter's producing the album, and at the very end, he brings Grover in. So that really says something about how Peter feels about this man. And maybe he's not hugging him all the time and saying, I love you and thank you so much or whatever. He doesn't do that. But it's through his actions that you learn about what Peter feels for people.
Yeah, and he has this complete bust up at one stage where he yells at him and says, you're fired even. But he comes back and he apologizes and says he was out of line. So it's interesting you were saying earlier about how he does listen and figures that out. And so, yeah, I think there's a future for them, actually, strangely.
Definitely. In the sequel, I see them. This is not over. They're sort of, if there's karma between these two guys, which I think there is, and I think they twin each other. And I think Grover becomes a Peter. I think in the next decade, Grover turns into Peter. I think it's in him already from the beginning of the play, but I think that's what would happen if I were to write the sequel, which I will never do. But, even at the very end of the play, Peter calls Grover brother.
That's great. I missed that one. That's brilliant. There is one more character we haven't talked about at all, and we'll do very briefly. Charlie, the assistant engineer, who's very funny, and it's almost like a comic double act with him and Grover. At the very beginning, we didn't mention that there are these two engineers in the cast because obviously the band gets all the attention. But there is a really important purpose for the engineers structurally in our perspective, isn't there?
Yeah, well, the engineers are the aperture through which we see the band. And so when the engineers are alone on stage, I mean, it's sort of like when the women are alone on stage, they have their moments and a different tonality. And when the engineers are alone and the microphones and everything are off, because, as Grover says at one point, it's like Watergate in here. Oh my God, we're being bugged. But when they know they can talk, it's like, oh my God, this band is driving me bonkers. What are we going to do? Let's strategize. Let's figure this out. Are they together? Are they separate now? What's going on? What are we supposed to do? What's our job? I mean, and they're also realizing like, we've got to manage these people. In order to get this record made, we can't just like sit and fuck with the knobs on this console. We have to figure out how to make these people get here on time and do their songs. That's our job. Oh my God. How are we going to do this? I didn't realize that was our job. But they sort of take it on. I mean, I am so in love with them as a pairing. They're such an odd couple, Charlie and Grover. And in the beginning, it's a little fraught between them for various reasons, but they actually start working together really, really well. And it's kind of like lovely to see them together on stage.
Yeah, and as you say, they actually have to navigate this and ultimately do in order to get the result. And it's very funny. It struck me initially as a bit like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They're than the wings of the main event, but they do more than that.
They're the chorus and the commentary. They're the proxy for the audience, right? They're us watching this crazy band.
Yeah, yeah. So let's jump to the ending. Basically, the album is essentially finished. The band disperse. And you're left with Diana and Grover. And I was saying, having this conversation you alluded to earlier about how he thought it was a whole nightmare. And she's saying it's the best thing that ever happened to her. And so there's a bit of a disagreement about what that suggests about what the future might be. And then we're left finally with just Grover on the stage, and he starts listening to some of the tracks that they've laid down on this album. And we just leave him listening to that. It's a quite low-key finish, but what is it telling us about the future or what's gone on in this past year?
Well, I can't speculate about the future. I mean, I think there's a revelation that happens very near to the end of the play that I don't want to give away, but I think it upends Grover's idea of what just happened to him. There's a perspectival shift for Grover at the end, and it makes him rethink his experience.
Doesn't it give him an opportunity to think, yes, maybe there is a future for me?
I think it's deliberately ambiguous. I think you could interpret it that way. I think, again, it's stereophonic at the end. It's this duality, this tensile suspension between opposites that I just hold for the very end. But I mean, I never realized how radical it was to end the play with this man sitting at a console with his back to us for, I don't know, 45 seconds or something. But the image really, I had no question that that was the ending when I wrote it. And I wrote the whole last scene in one sitting, and I did not know what I was going to write. I just came to it and sat down and wrote it in one sitting. And I was just in tears writing it because it's extremely emotional for me. But this final song that he's mixing is Holly's song, Drive, which you hear bits and pieces of, you realize over the course of the play. So there's a section where they're singing a harmony isolated. There's another section where they're laying down this, they're laying down that. And so you suddenly realize, like, oh my God, this is all one song. And he's peeling apart the tracks. He's peeling apart the harmony track and isolating it. And there's something about that final moment that the music becomes an archive, not only of the performance, but also the emotional life that these people lived as they were making the record. It is some kind of historical record of their experiences on Earth during that year. And I don't really fully understand why it hits me so emotionally listening to that, listening to him and watching him make the album at the end too, and watching him peel apart and put back together the tracks of this one particular song. I find it very enigmatic, and maybe that's why I just love it so much, because I can't fully understand the emotional pull it has on me.
It's very moving because I think there's no question the way he's doing it, that he's taking some joy and pride in what's been created, I think, himself. And we are as well. We are appreciating that there's a result here that counts. This is what they've created. This is the art. And it's also the multiple voices that have gone into it, the way he can play with that so that we're left with just the harmonies at one stage of the unadorned vocals, which is these voices very purely is all we're hearing of those who contributed to it.
Know what went into making those harmonies. And the harmony session was abominable. I mean, it was so hideous, but it sounds like heaven.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about that scene. The three of them are doing overdubbing on the harmonies, and Diane and Peter are at each other's throat the whole time. And I thought what was so amazing is that it finishes that scene with the most beautiful a cappella harmonies. You just, how has this happened? And actually, just reminding me while you were talking about it, what happens is, in a way, what Grover's listening to is what you listen to when you listen to Robert Plant at the beginning.
That's exactly right.
That emotion is just coming straight through the speakers, so to speak.
Right. We get the product. And what I'm giving you in the play is the process that leads to the product and all the complication and all the contradiction. Like, who is going to listen to that song and understand what happened to them? And how did they make that with everything going on around them? And so there's something about that schism is so fascinating to me. How are they rock stars making this beautiful angelic harmony? And they hate each other and they're screaming at each other. And it's so brutal. And they can just go back and forth like they're flipping a switch to do this, to make this product for people to hear. It's so enigmatic and puzzling, I think, as an artist myself, knowing what goes into this stuff, that this beautiful, it looks so effortless, but it's not.
Yes, I was just thinking as you were speaking here about yourself, where you were saying this was a hard period for you when you wrote this. And yet what we have is what you've written that speaks to us. We don't know all the hardship, but we feel something coming through this as we would when we listen to those albums that we love. And I actually think that the album will be a hit, that they'll go on the road with all the strife that entails, but they're bound together to do this. Diana may even do a solo album, I don't know, but no doubt they'll be back in the studio in a year or so and doing this all over again. What do you reckon?
I think you're probably right. And I think after everything, Holly sees Diana in the studio in a week and they just give each other little kisses and like, hi, honey. And then they talk about, what they're going to have for lunch. And, I think even Peter and Diana can get along again. I think it's actually quite boring in the end. They have to just be boring to do their work. They have to. Everything calms down, I think, and then they'll fight again. And I've had this with people where we fight and the process is really fraught and we're exhausted and we haven't slept. And then a couple months later, we have to do another thing together. And it's like, oh, hi. And I'm so happy to see them. If the album comes out and it's well received, they're going to be really happy about that and say, well, see, that was worth it. Let's go for another. Good for us.
Yeah, life goes on. There'll probably be a reunion tour in 25 years' time. Okay, David, thank you so much. This has been fantastic to have the opportunity to talk to you about this wonderful play. I say play, it seems more than a play. Before I let you go, one of the traditions of the podcast is I like to ask my guests to recommend a play that we might cover on the podcast, or actually, most importantly, that's just a personal favorite. Now, a playwright's going to have thousands of favorite plays, but I wonder if you have a play you might suggest to listeners that you particularly love.
Well, I have 2 or 3 favorite plays of the 21st century, but I would say my favorite is Top Dog, Underdog by Susan Laurie Parks. I think it is a perfect play. I teach it. Every time I teach a class, I teach that play and I read it and reread it, and I am mystified by how it was written. It feels like it was channeled from the heavens. It is quite an extraordinary work of art. So I really recommend Top Dog, Underdog by Susan Laurie Parks, a great, great American play.
Oh, that's so good, because I don't know it, and I love to have a play I don't know. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I will definitely go out and find that. Right. Thank you, David. I just have a note that Stereophonic is playing at the Duke of York's Theatre in the West End of London, booking up until the 11th of October. The performances and production are utterly mesmerizing. Like a great album, it has stayed with me, and I want to keep playing it over and over. Thank you, David. It's great to meet you, and good luck with the play and the next venture, not the sequel.
Thank you so much. That was so much fun.
As the curtain falls on the finished album and the disparate members of the band, who for the moment have gone their separate ways, we may reflect on the exceptional personal investment that they have made to make art. It is an investment because it comes with costs, the toll on their relationships or even health, as well as risks that what they make may not be as good as they hope or liked. But the payoff is the work itself that is created from the alchemy of graft, imagination, and collaboration. The same theatrical alchemy that has produced this play and production. Thanks for listening. See you next time. There are additional footnotes about this and every other play that we cover in the podcast available to our patrons. Patrons also enjoy early access to our sister podcast, The Play Review, in which Jody Rylett and I share our views on current productions on the London stage. To become a patron, please visit our website at theplaypodcast.com. And don't forget to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts so as not to miss an episode. Thank you again for listening. See you next time.